not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria has called for sanctions to be imposed against Israel for non-compliance with Security Council resolutions relating to the Palestinian question, including Resolution 2334. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks with several officials at the headquarters of the United Nations office in Vienna as part of his visit to Austria. Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab has called in Algiers media outlets to grant particular attention to the next presidential elections scheduled for September 7th. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. Algeria has called for sanctions to be imposed against the Zionist entity for non-compliance with Security Council resolutions relating to the Palestinian question, including Resolution 2334, while urging for an end to the massacres perpetrated in Gaza and the violence committed by Zionist settlers in the West Bank. More with Mohammed Khatil.
Speaking during the monthly session of the Security Council devoted to the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, Ammar Benjama, underlined that the already catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza has deteriorated further and people are dying from hunger due to the starvation policy of the Zionist occupier, who, he went on to say, must be held accountable for his crimes. Mr. Benjama evoked the schemes of the Zionist entity in the Gaza Strip, stressing that the objective of the Zionist barbarism is clear, which is a second Nakba, in addition to destroying Gaza and displacing its population.
People are dying from starvation. They are dying from hungers in Gaza. This is the cruel reality. The culprit is well known, the Israeli occupying power, that must be held accountable for this devastation. The objective of this barbarity is clear, a second Nakba. Yes, the occupying power aims to destroy Gaza and displace its population.
Meanwhile, the Algerian ambassador drew attention to the crimes committed by Zionist settlers in the West Bank against Palestinians with the support of the Zionist security forces. He added that under international humanitarian law, these forces have an obligation to protect Palestinian civilians, underlining that Zionist settlers are responsible for acts of provocation against Muslim holy sites, mainly the Al-Aqsa Mosque, causing tensions which could lead to a new escalation.
Settler terror have reached an unprecedented level, often perpetrated under the protection of the Israeli Defense Forces, who, under the international humanitarian law, have the obligation to protect the Palestinian civilians. We demand accountability for the perpetrator of this act of terror.
Mr. Benjama emphasized that the Palestinian Authority should be empowered to suspend the transfer of taxes and revenues collected on behalf of the Palestinian people by the Israeli Authority.
The Palestinian Authority should be empowered to assume its responsibilities. We condemn the occupying authority decision to suspend the transfer of clearance revenues collected on behalf of the Palestinians. These revenues belong to the Palestinians and are not a charity from the Israeli occupying power. They must be released without delay.
In conclusion, Mr. Benjama affirmed that no one could drive the Palestinians from their land. Those who believe they can uproot the Palestinians and force them to leave their land by force are mistaken, he said, adding that the schemes of the occupying power are doomed to failure.
The Palestinian death toll from Israel deadly aggression against the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023 has now surged to 37,658. Medical sources added that at least 86,237 others have also been injured in the onslaught. At least 32 people were killed and 139 others were injured in Israeli attacks that took place in the last 24 hours. The sources said that many victims are still trapped under the rubble and on the roads as rescuers are still unable to reach them. The Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and personal representative of the UN Secretary-General Tor Wensland has expressed concern about a flare-up of violence in the region, particularly between Hezbollah and Israel along the Blue Line. In his briefing to the UN Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, Mr. Wensland said the following.
Before turning to my regular briefing, allow me to express my serious concerns about the risk of escalations in the region, particularly between Israel and Hezbollah along the Blue Line. I reiterate the Secretary General's concerns that further military escalation will only guarantee more suffering, more devastations to communities in Lebanon and Israel, and more potentially catastrophic consequences for the region. In complement to the efforts of UNSCOL and UNIFIL, I'm encouraging all sides to immediately take urgent steps to de-escalate the situation. The ongoing hostilities in Gaza are further fueling regional instability. There must be an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. There is a deal on the table, and it should be agreed, and fast.
The UN official has stressed that mostly the entire population in Gaza is facing high levels of food insecurity, while access to humanitarian needs remains insufficient.
Effective mechanisms for humanitarian notification, safe conditions for humanitarian operations, and sufficient access to humanitarian needs remain sorely lacking and must be put in place without delay. Hunger and food insecurity persist. While projection of imminent famine in the northern governorates have been averted through an increase in food deliveries, food insecurity has worsened in the south. Nearly all of Gaza's population continues to face high levels of food insecurity, and nearly 500,000 people facing catastrophic insecurity.
Tor Wensland added that the escalating violence and tensions in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are deeply worrying. The World Health Organization's representative in Palestine, Rick Peppercorn, has said that the closure of the Rafah terminal by the Zionist entity has prevented the evacuation of at least 2,000 patients, calling for its reopening and that of the other crossings. The WHO representative added that at least 10,000 people must be evacuated from Gaza, explaining that this number is lower than the number of people requiring intensive care for war trauma and chronic illness. As Gaza remains on famine alert after food security experts has warned that more than 1 in 5 households go entire days without eating, launching the latest UN-partnered Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) report on hunger levels, Chief Economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Maximo Torero, said the following.
A high and sustained risk of famine persists, so that's very important to underline, across the whole Gaza Strip as long as conflict continues and humanitarian access is restricted. Given the unpredictability of the ongoing conflict and humanitarian access challenges, any significant change may lead to a very rapid deterioration into famine. While the whole territory is classified in emergency, this means IPC Phase 4, latest IPC findings show that around 495,000 people are still facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. This is IPC 5 through September 2024. This represents 22% of the population of the Gaza Strip, or 1 in 5 Gazians. Another 745,000 people, 33%, face emergency conditions. This is IPC4. The latest data show that on a regular basis, more than half of the population does not have any food to eat in the house, and over 20% going entire days and nights without eating.
According to the latest UN-partnered IPC report on hunger levels, 96% of the population, some 2.15 million people, face acute food insecurity at a crisis level or higher. Also presenting the IPC report, Arif Hussain, World Food Programme chief economist, underscored the high risk of famine across the whole Gaza Strip.
One of the very, very key messages of this report is that as long as there is continuation of hostilities, as long as there are restrictions on access, the risk of famine for the entire Gaza Strip remains real and remains highly significant. That's the biggest message which is coming out. In order to have an effective response, three things are a must. Number one, we should have enough commodities, whether commercial, whether humanitarian, coming into Gaza Strip. Number two, people who are bringing this stuff must be safe. And number three, people who are receiving these things need to be safe. And if we can make sure of those three things, which I don't know how you can do without a ceasefire, then we can improve the situation. Otherwise, it is very difficult.
That was World Food Programme chief economist Arif Hussain. Israeli occupation forces detained at least 20 Palestinians during military raids across the occupied West Bank in the last 24 hours. The detentions were concentrated in El Khalil and Jenin governorates, while the rest of the detentions took place among the governorates of Bethlehem and Qalqilia. The Israeli forces continue to carry out widespread raids, detentions and brutal assaults during arrest operations. Meanwhile, the Israeli occupation forces demolished 17 Palestinian-owned homes in the occupied West Bank, including Al-Quds. Here in Algiers, the Prime Minister, Mr. Nadir Al-Arbawi, received a telephone call from the Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of Palestine, Mr. Mohammed Mustafa, who conveyed the greetings and gratitude of the President of the State of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, to the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, for his tireless efforts to mobilize international support for the Palestinian cause. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Here in Algiers, the Prime Minister, Mr. Nadir Al-Arbawi, has chaired a government meeting in which a number of files has been discussed. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks with several officials at the headquarters of the United Nations office in Vienna at the start of the working visit that he is carrying out in Austria. Majid Mila has the details.
Tarchai Chawalit, with the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mariano Grossi, and with the Secretary Executive Director of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, Robert Flood. The talks with the head of the UNODC in the presence of the heads of departments of the UN body focused on the state of cooperation relations in areas relating to the fight against drugs, organized crime and the scourge of terrorism, in addition to matters relating to the recovery of looted funds. The minister noted in this regard Algerians' great efforts in the fight against attempts to flood cannabis, the most widespread narcotic in the African continent, according to successive UNODC world reports. During his meeting with the Director General of the IAEA, Mariano Grossi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs affirmed Algerians' permanent support for the agency and the efforts of its Director General made in favor of member countries, allowing them to benefit from nuclear energy and technology for peaceful purposes. The two parties discussed the state of cooperation between Algeria and the IAEA in the peaceful use of energy and nuclear applications within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, examining the prospects of strengthening this cooperation, particularly with the framework of the implementation of the framework agreement signed in November 2023. Attaf also met the Executive Secretary of the CDBTO, to whom he recalled Algerians' principled positions on the issues of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, inspired by its strict attachment to international law, which has long suffered from the after effects of French nuclear tests on man and the environment.
Now, the Council of the Nation has taken part in the third ordinary session of the sixth legislature of the Pan-African Parliament, and the meetings of its permanent committees, which are being held in the city of Midrand in South Africa. More with Mariam Barshi.
A communiqué of the Council said that the PAP's ordinary session is placed this year under the theme Education in Africa, adapted to the 21st century, building flexible education systems for increased access to inclusive, permanent quality and relevant learning in Africa. In her speech at the opening session, Palestinian ambassador to South Africa, Hanan Jarrar, reviewed the latest developments in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories, following the barbaric Zionist aggression, hailing the historic position of South Africa against the Zionist occupation. The Upper House of Parliament will be represented during the meetings by Senator and member of the PAP Review and Public Accounts Committee, Abdelmalik Tasharif. The Council of the Nation is also taking part today and tomorrow in Doha, Qatar, in the World Conference of Women Parliamentarians organized by the Qatari Consultative Council in collaboration with the United Nations Office Against Terrorism. A statement from the Upper House of Parliament said that the Council of the Nation will be represented at this conference devoted to the role of women parliamentarians in the implementation and control of legislation, policies and strategies to combat terrorism and violent extremism by Senator Mukhtaria Shentouf. The conference aims to support and strengthen the leadership and participation of women parliamentarians in this area and to facilitate the creation of a network to exercise their role in establishing peace and security and the fight against violent extremism in all its forms. Participants will examine several questions, including the inclusion of social dimension in strategies to combat terrorism and violent extremism, best practices for the engagement of women parliamentarians in the areas of legislation and policy development, in addition to examining the challenges and measures necessary to combat terrorism.
Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab has called in Algiers media outlets to grant particular attention to the next presidential election slated for September 7th. Speaking during the awards ceremony for the winners of the competition for the best tourism media work organized in coordination with the Ministry of Tourism and Handicrafts, Mr. Lagab insisted on the imperative of granting this event the necessary importance, and this by providing citizens with the necessary constitutional, legal and political information and knowledge so that they can build their own opinions and choices. The minister also underlined the importance of supporting the National Independent Electoral Authority and guaranteeing coverage of the different stages of the electoral process with professionalism and impartiality by granting the same speaking time to each of the candidates and by explaining their programs with precision and fairness as part of the law governing media on the one hand and the law on the elections on the other hand.
I take advantage of the presence of the media directors during this conference and at the awards ceremony for the participants in the competition to once again invite them to give the presidential elections of next September 7 the importance they deserve by providing constitutional, legal and political information and knowledge to allow citizens to build their own opinion, accompany the Independent National Electoral Authority and cover the different stages of the election with professionalism, in addition to giving equal opportunities for expression to the candidates and explain their programs carefully as part of media laws on the one hand and the election law on the other.
That was Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab. 27 contenders for the election or presidential election on the 7th of October or September have withdrawn individual signature subscription forms. The chairman of the Independent National Elections Authority, Mohamed Shafi, said at a press conference on Sunday that the operation to collect individual signature application forms for the presidential election was continuing, pointing out that substantial material and human resources had been mobilized for this operation, including more than 14,000 agents. Candidates can now submit their applications to the 4,903 certification points throughout the country, which will continue until midnight on the 18th of July 2024. Today is International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. The significance of the word Drug Day 2024 lies in its ability to raise awareness about the severe consequences of the drug abuse and illicit trafficking. Next is a program on this day.
Hello and welcome to this new edition of your weekly program, The Health Magazine.